Welcome to We Are Old, Get Over It, the podcast for active senior living and getting the most out of life. I'm your host, Ken Gluckman. During our summer break, we share highlights of some of our favorite conversations from the past year. These are just short clips from the full-length episodes. You can find the link to the original episodes in the show notes here, or just search the episode title on our YouTube channel or in your preferred podcast app. Help us share this useful and informative information by inviting your family and friends to visit our podcasts. Share a clip or an episode with them, and it will give you something to talk about. And now, let's laugh and learn for the week.
As far as how I got involved in this project, I really wasn't looking for it at all. I, of course, knew about who Mal Evans was. He was the Beatles roadie for most of their time together. He had a counterpart, Neil Aspinall, who started a year or so earlier than he did with them. But I wasn't looking to tell this particular story. I was intrigued by it, like a lot of Beatles writers and fans and aficionados are. I've known a lot about Mal simply from studying them. During COVID, his son Gary approached me about telling his story, his father's story, Mal's story. And like a lot of folks, I had time on my hands during that period.
I remember that time also.
Yes.
I
And
was making food. I was busy making recipes for what we were going to eat for the entire week.
Gary is very much like his father. He's a very kind person. And I knew within minutes of speaking with him the first time, Beck, I'm speaking with him later today. But I knew from that very first occasion that I would do whatever it was that would help him out. And it turns out he wanted his father's story to be told. The kicker for me, though, was at the end of the conversation, I figured I could get 80,000 words on Mal. But knowing that I would need to do more, I said to Gary, "So is it true that there was all this stuff?" And Gary said, "Yeah, do you want to see it?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And within a week or so, a gigantic box arrived on our porch from England, and my wife did what we all did during that period. She brought it inside wearing gloves, right? And then disinfected the entire box, just as she was doing with our groceries around this period. And we broke it open and were almost immediately surprised by all of the things we had never seen before. Mal was a pack rat. He was the first Beatles archivist. Um, Took thousands of photos, collected material, just fascinating archive to behold. And I knew at that point the book was probably going to be double the length that I had originally planned.
Okay, so uh, you were enticed by it. When did, he has a whole story unto himself. How did he first get hooked up with the Beatles?
Well, that's kind of the strangeness of it. Mal loved rock and roll. He was a big Elvis fan. And at one point, he tried to learn how to play guitar um, simply because he loved the vocation. He loved rock and roll. He had a job in Liverpool wherein he was a telecommunications engineer for the British Post Office, the GPO. And Mal um, had free time on his hand at lunch, and he would walk around different parts of the city. Eventually, he found himself in what we now call the Cavern Quarter. He marched down the famous steps because he heard what sounded like, in his words, good rock and roll. It uh, He was a little older than everybody by this point. He's about 5 years older than the Beatles themselves, 5 to 7, and he would have stuck out like a sore thumb for being older, but he would also stick out like a sore thumb for being gigantic.
What do you mean
Um,
by gigantic?
he is huge, 6'3", but almost just as wide. I mean, he has massive wingspan. He's a big guy, was a big guy, and so and that's a big part of his story because being so large made him feel self-conscious. Um, he had a very good job. Being telecommunications engineer meant that he could afford things that a lot of Liverpudlians couldn't. He had a car. He had a mortgage. had a wife, and by the time he made that first march down the steps, he probably had his first son, Gary, born in 1961. The nearest I can figure is that he was probably marching down those stairs pretty late in 61. He became friends with George Harrison, um, who said, you know, you love coming here. You're so big and ugly. Wouldn't it be great if you became a bouncer? They need people at the door, and then you can hang out with the bands. And that sounded pretty good to Mal. He didn't particularly need the money, but having extra spending money in that post war world was pretty good. And he began to eventually work for Mr. Epstein at NIMS and become part of the Beatles universe.
You mention in your book and that when they performed on top of the building, what's the story there? And there's a story about him in particular, uh, where they were performing. I think it was the last time they performed live on the rooftop. Could you could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, it ends up becoming quite fascinating what happens on the rooftop. That's January 30th, 1969. What's interesting about it is the advance work Mal had to do. They couldn't really just step out on their roof and perform. Mal could tell that there were some engineering dangers that were taking place. In fact, he got a team to come out and survey very quickly how the roof needed to be reinforced. So he had some wood planking put out there. In fact, you can see Paul bouncing on it a little bit, just testing out the rooftop. And of course, another problem that occurred was when it was time to bring their equipment up, Mal and his assistant, Kevin Harrington, suddenly found that it wasn't as simple as bringing guitars up via a service elevator. First of all, the elevator was very tiny, you know,
Okay.
maybe just a few square feet. So it was a very narrow elevator. Um, Paul's bass amp was too big, so when they finally got there, they had to take a skylight off to be able to bring that equipment out onto the roof. It was quite an operation to get up there, and I didn't know that until I had access to all of Mal's materials, and it became very clear that had been a much bigger job than I would have imagined. It wasn't just them going upstairs with some amps and cranking it up.
And that was an event where they didn't really announce that they were going to do that, correct?
Right. They didn't announce it at all, because they weren't sure they would, right? I mean, George Harrison was not fond of the idea. I think he said something like, "I don't want to be up there among the chimneys." You know, it was also very cold. There was kind of a whipping wind in the air. And it was finally John who just said, "Let's just go up." And they went up and did it. You know, they didn't really have a prepared set list. You can see in photographs that Mal and Kevin have brought up a lot of keyboards actually that are sitting out on a side roofing area on some eaves. I guess they were thinking about using those too. They didn't ultimately. They had Billy Preston playing his electric piano, but I think they were just trying to be ready for anything. It was that impromptu. They did suggest to Mal at one point that they would have liked to have had helicopters. Um,
Which
Mal
they
was
could have
got
afforded, correct?
yeah, I mean, but the thing was, Mao got so busy, and he was right to do it this way, concerning himself with the engineering of that space and making sure it was safe because it was not. That by the time he started making phone calls, he learned that you can't just have helicopters run around London airspace, even back then. And he realized that road had already been closed.
Hmm.
Um, and Mal had been living like this for a long time, where he was having extramarital affairs and friendships in lots of far flung places. The difference was this time he got busted for it. And I imagine his ideation about how he would end his life began sometime pretty early in 1974, because he had been found out that he had been disloyal to his wife and, by extension, his family. He will only go back to England one more time, April or May 1975, to shoot an interview with David Frost for a salute to the Beatles. But otherwise, uh, he was going along trying to find himself. He had had some success as a producer and he wanted to continue that. He'd had a top 5 hit with Badfinger, No Matter What, one of the great power pop songs of any era. Yeah, and he knew he had this skill. He'd had some luck working with Ringo, composing a song for the Ringo album. Um, but he also, of course, was in the LA of the early 1970s, which was rampant with drug abuse. And that made it very difficult for him to find himself. He was working on his memoirs and many other projects, but things came to a head when his wife told him that finally, after so much years of this nonsense, so many years of it, she was going to see a lawyer. And she told him that sometime very late in 1975, probably during their phone call on Christmas Day. Um, well, the clock really started ticking at that point. And on January 4th, after the previous night when Mal wrote his last will and testament, he grabbed his working Winchester rifle and went upstairs and barricaded himself in the bedroom. And his girlfriend, Fran, with little other recourse, called the police. Mal encouraged her to do so. And when they came up to the door, they told him to put down the gun. And in fact, rather than doing that, a very sober Mal aimed it at them and they killed him. But it was suicide by cop.
Pretty sad that that would be his ending.
It really is because, when you think about it, there was just so much more upside to come. I guess you couldn't quite see it in 1976. You couldn't imagine, that the Beatles would make billions of dollars and persist well into the 21st century and very likely far beyond that, where we are now. But, Mal really developed a kind of tunnel vision at that point that he was not going to see his kids again. He'd spoken to John Lennon, I think, on January 1st or January 2nd, and John had tried to counsel him that, divorce is not the end of the world. John knew this very well, and was trying to help Mal sort of release this masculine energy that was sort of trapping him. But obviously, Mal could not see beyond the fact that his wife was finally going to do something about his behavior. The compartments of his life had collided.